Thank you so much for joining us today for this forum and this discussion. If you have not had an opportunity to get some food, we encourage you to come over. There's plenty of Chick-fil-A and chips and cookies and water over here on this side, so please help yourself. Today's event is being broadcast live on social media and will be shared, and links will be made available. If you would like to share that, we can make those channels available to you. Also, wanted to let you know, people have said, what are we hosting? The past several days, the end of last week, there was a lot of discussion after the FDA approval of the Pfizer vaccine, and there's been discussion, if you've watched the news the past day or two here in Utah, about the Utah Board of Higher Education making their feelings known regarding the use of vaccinations for college students in our state moving forward. And so we decided as an administration it would be really a positive step to let's talk about get all the questions answered, and so we invite you to participate. I want to introduce Dr. Garen Gulbranson, who is the director of the Booth Wellness Center here on campus, who will share some information with you, and then he'll introduce today's moderator, who will then introduce our panelists. So please welcome Dr. Gulbranson.
Thank you, VP Beatty. My name is Dr. Garen Gulbranson. I'm the director of the Booth Wellness Center. I'm a clinical psychologist, and our center has been tasked and has been leading up our COVID response amongst other parties here on campus the past 18 months. I did want to share some information with you before we turn the time over to our presenters today and to Vince Brown, who will be facilitating. But I do want to encourage you, as we are discussing today, come with questions. Make sure you're asking those for members of the panel. It's very important that we feel we can express and ask and answer those questions in a way in which we are educated on the facts of what's going on. We reside on a college campus, whether you're in dorms or outside, and a part of being in a college environment is asking questions. It's learning. It's educating ourselves and knowing the facts. So that's part of the intention of what we're doing today. As far as DSU's COVID-19 response is concerned, this is something that's been always on our minds, something we've been trying to respond to throughout the pandemic. To give you some data and information, this time last year, when we began the fall 2020 semester, that first week of class, we had 5 known cases of COVID-19. This first week alone, we've quadrupled that number. We're at 22 cases. With the potential for like exponential infection, this becomes a public health issue. This is a school issue. And I'm hoping people are understanding this is also a personal issue. The choices and things that we make directly affect not only us, but our friends, family, and loved ones. So please be mindful that the questions you ask, the behaviors and things that we do, the steps that we take, they reach far beyond us. So with that in mind, I want to introduce Vince Brown, who will be leading our, facilitating our panel. Vince is with our, with our Institute of Politics here at DSU. He's a JD, and you may have recognized him from other discussions when we've done Pizza and Politics or other activities, things here on campus. So please welcome him and join him in clap, and appreciate his time facilitating this for us.
Well, thank you. That was better than I expected. I appreciate that, and thank you, Dr. Gulbranson. Welcome everyone to our discussion today about the COVID-19 vaccine. I asked Dr. Gulbranson to make it very quick in terms of the introduction. Our panelists were very distinguished, and we could go on and on about their biographies. Have also agreed that we're going to go rather quickly down the line in terms of introduction. So let's do that right now. Hold your applause to the end, and then we'll welcome them, okay? We're going to start off right here with Dave Heaton. Dave Heaton's with the Southwest Utah Public Health Department. Sitting next to Dave is Dr. Ellen Arch. She's an MD, Clinical and Biochemical Genetics and Developmental Pediatrics. Dr. Kathleen O'Bray, an MD sitting next to Dr. Arch, is an MD specializes in outpatient internal medicine. and she has some experience with dealing with long-term COVID. Next to her is Dr. Patrick Carroll. Dr. Patrick Carroll is the medical director at St. George Regional Hospital, and he's a neonatal physician. And then finally, but not least, we have Dr. Catherine Walker. She's an MD OBGYN. So would you please give a round of applause to our very distinguished panel? Thank you so much for being here. I can't think of 5 people that would be busier on a day like this, but we really appreciate it. Thank you for coming to talk to us. So today we're talking about COVID-19 vaccines, and I'm going to focus my questions primarily on the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. Why? Well, because of what we heard earlier. The FDA has given its imprimatur, or seal of approval, for the Pfizer vaccine, and prior to that it only had an emergency use designation. Well, that means under state law that universities can now mandate a vaccine if they so choose. So this is something that I'm sure you're all interested in, otherwise you wouldn't be here, and I appreciate you being here as well. All right, let's start. Let's start with the basics. Mr. Heaton, let's start with you. How are we doing in southern Utah on COVID? We just heard how DSU has a growing number of cases. How's southern Utah doing?
If I could take a few minutes, and this is something I do several times a week, either on our website or social media pages or meeting in front of groups, is to give a very brief update on how Southwest Utah, the 5 counties, is what it includes our district as far as COVID-19 are concerned. Currently, as of our last official report, we are nearing 34,000 cases. Those are positive cases of COVID-19 in the 5-county district. We last reported 72 residents that were hospitalized. That can change on a daily basis, and I'm hearing from St. George Regional Hospital's public information officer that fortunately that's probably dropped in the past few days. But at one point, we went from our winter surge down to the point where I think the hospital, at least for a brief time, was able to celebrate having very few COVID-19 patients. Since then, we've surged up again to where it was 50 and then 70, then back down into, I think, the late 50s again. As far as deaths, we've had 304 of our Southwest Utah residents pass away due to COVID-19 that had a COVID-19 factor in their death. As far as vaccinations, we currently rank in the United States about 29th as far as people having at least one vaccine. That figure includes the entire population, though, and so we prefer to look at one way in people who are eligible to get vaccinated, which is currently anyone 12 and over, which gives us a number currently in Utah, an actual number of 70%, at least partially vaccinated, that are eligible. In Southwest District, we're actually quite lower. There's a 50 to 60% vaccination rate. In your typically, I know there's people here of all ages, but as far as college age, in the 19 to age, sorry, now I got to put my reading glasses back on. In the 19 to 29 age group, it's estimated that in Utah, college kids about 50% fully vaccinated. And so that's a figure that we're liking to hear, that young people are finding out, getting vaccinated, do whatever they can to protect themselves. But that leaves us some room for improvement. Our main message right now with the Public Health Department, and we can answer questions to get more specifics, especially if there's any concerns, is to get vaccinated right now. That's the single most important, most protective thing you can do as far as risk benefits and getting the most bang for your buck as far as protection against COVID-19. That is our primary message at this point.
Great, thank you, Mr. Heaton. And let me go down to the doctors now. And can you just give us a very brief description of how the Pfizer-BioNTech, the one that's been FDA approved now for full approval, how it was developed, so that we can have just a basic understanding. Anyone like to tackle that?
Let me take that.
Yeah, so this is super cool. I'm glad everybody's already sitting down, because if you're standing up and I tell you about all this cool science, you're going to probably tip over. So thank you for sitting down already. The Pfizer vaccine, along with Mrna, is what's called an RNA, or an mRNA vaccine. It stands for messenger RNA. Any science majors out here right now? Okay, so I know who I can call on. Perfect. So the mRNA vaccine is mRNA, which is surrounded by a bubble. The way that I like to describe it is when you go out and you blow bubbles, and you catch one on your wand, and then you catch a second bubble on your wand, sometimes those two bubbles merge into one bigger bubble. That's kind of what happens with this mRNA vaccine. You've got the mRNA inside of this little bubble, merges with the cell, and then goes into the cytoplasm, which is not where your DNA is held. As you recall from the glory days of biology class in high school, we all have DNA, which is then transcribed into RNA, and the RNA is translated into protein, and the protein goes and tells our body to do different things. So RNA is then into the cytoplasm where it can be translated into a protein. Now that's important because the mRNA does not go into the nucleus where the DNA is. So there's been a big misconception about, boy, this is gene therapy and this is really scary. I want to be really clear, this is not gene therapy. This does not incorporate into your DNA. Your body takes that RNA and makes a protein, and the protein that it makes is analogous to a protein that's part of coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus, which then allows the body to make an immune response. And once that's done, the mRNA breaks down. It doesn't stay in your body forever. It's not a very stable molecule. So super cool technology. It's not new in terms of using mRNA or using this technology. It's new in terms of the vaccine, where historically vaccines are protein-based, and so we've gone one step ahead from that. Dr. Arch, you're a geneticist. What would you add to that?
So does everybody know what mRNA is? Just, okay. I don't know whether that means no. So mRNA is a chemical step between your genes, which are made up of your DNA, and making proteins. And those proteins can be serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in your brain. They can be enzymes that break down your food. So every time your body needs to make a protein, it makes mRNA. And mRNA, because you don't want too much of any particular protein around at any given time, is broken down fairly quickly. You can always make more. So within 24 to 48 hours, mRNA is typically broken down. So the idea here was that the DNA, your DNA is kept in the nucleus of this cell. Do you remember the nucleus? Anybody remember that? The cell is like this, if the cell is a big circle, there's this membrane bound. So this area inside the cell called the nucleus, bound by a membrane that keeps it away from the rest of the cell. And the DNA is kept in there. When your body makes mRNA, the mRNA is made in the nucleus and it passes outside the nucleus. That membrane then keeps it from coming back in. At that point, it's translated into protein. So the idea of the vaccine was, hey, maybe we can take a piece of the COVID virus, and that piece being the spike protein, which helps the virus to enter our cells. Maybe we can take a piece of that virus, make the mRNA to it, and give it to our bodies to take up into our cells and then make into protein. There's no need for it to go back into the nucleus, and it doesn't. So it can't incorporate into your DNA. And mammalian or mammals, studies in mammals have shown that this stuff is broken down within 24 hours.
Great. I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and that leads me to my next question. So you've addressed the DNA rumor that's going around. It affects your DNA, but clearly it doesn't because it's in the nucleus, it's protected by the membrane.
Right.
That's fantastic. Most of the time when we're discussing medications or we're discussing vaccines, we talk about two words. We talk about safe and effective. So you've kind of addressed the safety aspect with respect to your DNA. But can any of you explain to the audience how we know this is a safe vaccine?
Anybody?
Well, we studied it, right?
Oh, yeah, sorry. We're just
I'm happy to take that question as well. So how do we know that it's safe, and then how do we know that it's effective? Anything when it goes through the FDA process, there's a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trial. And phase 1 and phase 2 are specifically based on safety. And as you move from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3 trials, the number of people enrolled in those studies increases. And preclinical trials in non-human, so animal trials. So there have been a number of different trials, and for both the Pfizer and the Mrna vaccine, there were between 35 and 40,000 people that were included in those trials. Double-blind, randomized controlled trials. And what that means is the person that got the vaccine didn't know if they were getting the vaccine or if they were getting a placebo. The person administering the vaccine didn't know if they were administering a vaccine or administering a placebo. There was a researcher that had the code book that knew which was which. And that way, that's done to minimize bias, the introduction of bias by either the patient, the study subject, or by the person conducting the study. And so through those trials, we've been able to see safety data. We've also been able to see effectiveness data. Importantly, since those trials, 40,000 people is a lot of people, but there are millions of people, hundreds of millions of people in the United States and the world. So since that time, we've been able to continue to follow and look at outcomes, look at data, both in terms of safety and effectiveness.
And I often hear the question, can you still transmit the COVID-19 virus if you're vaccinated under Pfizer or Moderna? Are you less likely to transmit it? Are you less likely to get severely ill? Can you address that pretty quickly?
Take that one, Dr. Ray.
Sure. So the latest data, and correct me if I'm wrong, panel members, is that you can still transmit the virus even if you've been vaccinated. And of course we now have the Delta variant, which has changed the game a bit. What was the second part of the question? Sorry.
Severely ill, whether or not it
severely ill.
keeps
So
you from
this
getting
is the
severely.
key thing, is that the choice to get vaccinated significantly reduces your risk of, one, getting COVID-19, even the Delta variant, and two, really reduces your risk of getting severely ill. So I'll let Dr. Carroll share the latest data, but the vast majority of people, even with the Delta variant, who are being hospitalized and who are dying from COVID here in St. George and across the country are the unvaccinated. So we do see some people who are getting infected who have been vaccinated, but by and large, those people are not getting severely ill or dying. In some cases, people who are much older than most of the people in this room and who have or immunocompromised they may not get as good of a benefit from the vaccine. But I'll let you share the data.
Yeah, so thank you. This is the audience participation portion of the panel. I hope I'm not going off script too much here. Let's imagine for a second that we had a population that was exactly 0% vaccinated. What percent of infections would be among unvaccinated? 100%. If no one's vaccinated, 100% of the cases would be among unvaccinated. If our population was 100% vaccinated, what percent would be among the unvaccinated? I think I said it backwards. So if you're 100% vaccinated, then every single case is a breakthrough case. If you're not vaccinated, if no one's vaccinated, then there's no breakthrough cases because no one's vaccinated. So that's really important to understand as kind of a baseline. What we're seeing in our population, like Mr. Heaton referenced, is as a state, we're seeing higher vaccination rates than what we're seeing in southern Utah. And here, 50 to 60% of those that are eligible. Now, if the vaccine was perfectly effective, we would see, well, let's start. If it was 0% effective, then the percent of people in the hospital that had received the vaccine would be about the same or exactly the same as the percent of people in the population. So if there's 60% of people that were vaccinated and the vaccine was complete garbage, not effective, then 60% of the people in the hospital would have been vaccinated, exactly the same as the normal population. So what are we seeing? We're seeing 50 to 60% of people vaccinated, and I look at the hospital data every day, and I look at these individuals by name because they're real people. These aren't numbers, these are people. They're your friends, your neighbors, your family members that are in the hospital, and each one is important. And what I'm seeing is in the ICU, 95% of patients in the ICU are unvaccinated. About 5% of patients in the ICU are vaccinated, considered breakthrough cases. And of those that are in the ICU that have received vaccination, at least half of those, it looks like, are people that have a compromised immune system. So those are people that have had a kidney transplant, have cancer, or on a medication that purposely decreases the effectiveness of their immune system to treat a disease that they have. Now, that also makes it so their response to the vaccine is less effective. So in terms of effectiveness, the data is actually quite clear in the hospital that this vaccine is effective. Is it perfect? It's not. We are seeing breakthrough cases. And I would caution everybody not to look at those breakthrough cases and believe that that means the vaccine is not effective. The vaccine is very effective, and we're seeing that. Let me share one additional data point. When I've looked at the patients that have died in the hospital since December, we've had over 160 patients in the hospital. Ms. Treat mentioned over 300 in our community. Not all have been in the hospital. Of those that have died in the hospital, I can count on one hand, and I won't need all of my fingers on that hand, to say how many were died with that were fully vaccinated. Nearly everybody that has died in our hospital has been unvaccinated.
And I've heard this term, the pandemic is now the pandemic of the unvaccinated. Is that something that you would agree with? Well, you brought up the ICU, and it made me think of something that I wanted to ask you. It's a concept known as compassion fatigue. And one of my students brought an article about it from a doctor into one of my classes. And it was fascinating. We had a robust debate. Are you seeing that at the hospital? And if you are, can you kind of describe what you're seeing amongst healthcare workers?
Unfortunately, yes. I really feel at St. George Regional, people have had our healthcare workers, from our administration to the frontline workers to the housekeepers, have really done an amazing job. Just a picture I had before the vaccine really took really good hold was walking through the ICU on shortly after Christmas to visit a gal who had just shortly delivered, 31, healthy, who was in the unit, intubated. And it brought tears to my eyes because the nurses were there on that Christmas time. The housekeepers were suiting up to clean the rooms. People were pitching in, and that is still going on. But we have lost, unfortunately, and this is a nationwide problem, we have lost our nurses, we have lost our healthcare workers. Not because they don't care, not because they don't have the compassion, but they are literally worn out. And they want to care, and they want to continue to take excellent care of patients. But it has taken a toll, and that is a real thing. And labor and delivery, I'm sorry I don't know the exact numbers, but we've lost many nurses, early retirement, some with long-term disease, a few from the COVID itself, from their infections. And so it is a real issue. We want to carry on, we are still compassionate, but our numbers are dwindling. And so we do really encourage people to think about the vaccination. For our healthcare workers, for yourselves, for your loved ones, it is important.
And we're going to have a period for questions. Yeah, thanks. No, not right now. Not right now. Wait till the question period, please. Thank you. Sir, if you don't wait till the question period, then we'll ask you to leave, okay? Thanks. Let me just finish up, and then we'll get to questions. They're going to be on these microphones on the sides here. Finally, we've got a bunch of young people here. This is a university. Very often, young people feel like they're invincible. I've got a list of reasons I can think of, but I'm sure you can do better in terms of kind of giving students a reason why they should get vaccinated, because they largely believe they're not going to get sick from COVID-19. Anyone want to take that?
So It's a really good question. It's something that each of you may have grappled with. When you look at the data and you see that the likelihood of dying or the likelihood of being in the hospital is considerably higher if you're 80, 85 years old. And it decreases considerably to the time you're 10 or 15 years old. And so you may have looked at that data and thought, well, I'm 18, 19, 20, 25, 28, you know, I'm in that low risk age group. And I think, first of all, we have to acknowledge that that is true. That for me to say that you're in the same risk group as someone that is 65, 80, 85 years old with comorbid conditions would be not accurate. That as a college-age student, you are in a lower risk group. What we're seeing, the Delta variant seems to be a different ballgame. So we are now seeing, when I look at the list of patients in the hospital, I'm seeing 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds in the hospital. The average age has dropped. The last I looked at, the average age in the ICU was 56. Now that means there were patients over that and there were patients under that. The chances are, if you get COVID, your likelihood of hospitalization or death is quite low. I've seen data as high as 15% in terms of up to 15% of people, even college-age kids that get COVID, may have some long-term effects of COVID. And so that's data we're still trying to tease out as we continue to watch. So there's two reasons to get vaccinated, and I would recommend, I would encourage you to get vaccinated if you haven't already. One is for your own personal protection, with the caveats that I just mentioned in terms of your risk. Two is for protection of those around you, your friends, your family. Last year, what we saw in the data is when college started, there was an increase among college-age students testing positive. We didn't see a lot of them in the hospital. We saw very few of them die. And then we saw it skip a generation. It skipped the 30, 39-year-olds, and we saw it in the 40, 49-year-olds, those that are the age of your parents that were testing positive. Really interesting data where college-age students were taking it home to their parents or to their grandparents. And then we saw several weeks later an increase in hospitalizations and deaths from parent, grandparent age individuals. So two reasons: one, personal protection; two, protection of those around you and decreasing spread through herd immunity.
And Dr. Carroll, you'd mentioned the percentage of people who are unvaccinated in the ICU, but is the ICU full, and how long has it been, if it has been full?
Yeah, so in St. George, we have a 32-bed ICU, and today is the 13th day in a row that we've been over 100% capacity. So what that means is when we're over 100% capacity, then we have to overflow into another unit. And so we're taking care of ICU patients in a non-ICU bed. And we're bringing in ICU nurses as best we can to take care of those patients, and we're providing the same level of care, but you can imagine that's what we call contingency care. It's as much as we'd like to believe we're providing exactly the same level of care outside of the ICU for an ICU patient as in the ICU, there are things that there's additional risks for when we do that. So, that impacts, believe it or not, college-age students are more likely to be in the ICU from a motorcycle accident or rock climbing accident or something like that. And it's not because you're invincible. I was invincible when I was in college, but I'm not suggesting you guys are invincible. That was just me. But that's where you're more likely to be in the hospital. And so it does play into, when we're full because of COVID, it also plays into taking care of patients that don't have COVID in the hospital or in the ICU.
And Dr. Arch, did you want to add something to that?
I just wanted to say, just putting that in very simple terms, if you're to get vaccinated, your risk of dying from COVID is low. It's not zero. But you will be protecting your parents, because that's the age group that we're admitting right now. The other piece is that if you think about it, if you roll your four-wheeler, or if your mom has an MI, a heart attack, and we're that stretched at the hospital because we have so many admissions from COVID, we may not have as good care as we want to. That is a sad fact, but it's the way it is. And so we want everybody to get vaccinated for various reasons, but one is just to protect our ability to take care of you.
We're running low on time, can you believe it? We're very limited on time today, and I want to leave some time for questions. Most of the people in this room are probably vaccinated against smallpox, rubella, mumps, et cetera. Isn't that the case? What's happened? What's the difference with COVID that you've seen? The main objections that people are having?
Well, I think the main objections are we grew up not necessarily, we're not getting smallpox vaccinations anymore because it's eradicated. It worked in the people that got it. But most people in this room, you're right, probably have had, measles, mumps, rubella vaccine, polio vaccine, those things. And so I think we've, grown up with those, and so fewer questions are being asked at this point. I think people are asking a lot of questions about the COVID vaccine. I think that's a good thing to ask questions. Questioning is good. Where I see it going is some of the questions and some of the hesitation is shifting the risk from, boy, I've got a lot of questions and I'm going to hesitate, shifts the risk to actually a greater risk with COVID and getting infected and impacts of that. So questions are good, and we want to provide answers to those questions. So.
And Dr. O'Brien, did you have something to add?
I was just going to add that I think we live in a very different time. Some of it's good and some of it's bad, but we live in a world of information overload and also misinformation overload. And it's overwhelming. I think it's overwhelming to all of us, and that's why we try our hardest to really stick with the science and the data, and also be receptive, though. We can't be so closed-minded that we don't listen to what's out there, and that's why we're here, and that's what I do individually with my patients. We really believe in shared decision-making. So anytime I prescribe a medication or even suggest a vaccine, I'm not forcing somebody to do something, but we're having a conversation about where the risk and benefits are. And, on average for the COVID vaccines, the benefit really is in favor of getting one, but we also want to be here to answer questions because we know there's so much information. One thing I deal with, does anybody know what long COVID is or long haulers? Anybody heard about that? So that's, some people get sick with COVID and they're quite ill for 2 weeks or, and then they get better. But a lot of people, even with mild COVID, we're finding, because we're analyzing the data and the science, they will have long-term symptoms. These can be chronic cough, it can be fatigue, sort of like chronic fatigue syndrome, headaches, palpitations. I've known people, patients and friends who have lost their sense of smell, and when it comes back, all they can smell is fecal matter. So these are not things that most people want, and so that's another reason to consider, to really think about vaccination and why we're here.
Along those lines, we only have about 3 minutes before I need to open it up for questions. Along those lines, there's a bunch of rumors that are going around. And so I just kind of wanted to see if we could go through a couple to lighten the mood a little bit. Thought we'd start off with the most unusual claim, that there are microchips in the vaccines. You seen any evidence of that? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I do. Those are activated when the nurse flicks the needle. You laugh, but that's actually been brought up to us before when we've done flu shot shootouts. It's amazing the information that gets out there. You might wonder, how can someone believe something like that? But sometimes those belief systems can build and become quite convincing, and then people start looking for information that backs that up for them. But I, for one, I'm not a doctor, but I'm pretty sure there's no microchips.
I was just going to say that from a practical perspective, that vaccine comes in a little vial of liquid, and I think it has to be like diluted and stuff, and you have to take out a certain amount for each patient through a tiny, tiny needle. So the chances that you could figure out how to put in a microchip in there and make sure everybody got one, that they weren't sitting in the bottom of the vial, these are not real possibilities.
And on a more serious note, I have heard a lot of people say that they're concerned that the vaccine will cause infertility or is unsafe for women who want to become pregnant. We're lucky enough to have Dr. Walker here. Dr. Walker, would you like to address that?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is definitely a issue that has been raised by social media, a specific site which we kind of can trace back. It's since been taken off. Their concern was that the protein that everyone's talking about, so the mRNA that actually translates into that protein is very similar to a protein that helps with the fetus implantation. the change of the cells so the placenta can form, so that environment of the pregnancy attaching to the uterus can continue. And luckily, they have done studies that confirm that basically there is no connection to the protein that's inserted through the vaccine and that protein that helps with implantation. So they've been able to reassure us that there is no effect on infertility, because obviously if that was a true concept, that would be a lifelong concern. So I do understand people's concern when you read something like that. It just shows how tricky it is to know where you're getting your information, but I can reassure you that studies definitely have confirmed. They recently, this month, have come out with a study actually working with in vitro on embryos, and very specifically studying that there was no implantation problem. The other thing is the real virus, when you actually get the infection, you're getting that same protein, and we have not seen in those that have gotten sick from the virus any increased risk of miscarriage or infertility. So that also reassures us doubly. Hopefully that can help. And I did want to do a plug also from my field on the vaccination. ACOG, American College of OBGYNs, on July 30th came out with a very strong recommendation that all patients are eligible for all 3 vaccinations. We can reassure you that it doesn't affect fertility. It does not cause any birth defects. It does not cause miscarriage. It does not cause long-term menstrual regulation problems. So we can really reassure you that this vaccination is an important fight against the COVID virus. The chance, just because there are a lot of ladies in the audience or people that would be involved in a pregnancy and you're of the age, COVID infection in pregnancy, as far as serious infections, in fairness, is very low. Probably, the percentage is extremely low. But the problem is on the studies, and again, there's a recent study that's come out throughout all the a grouping of U.S. hospitalizations studying pregnant gals through what we call the V-Safe. So when you get the vaccine, you report back through your phone, which is fabulous, and they check on you to see how you're doing and what your side effects are, and they've been able to study 136,000 pregnancies as of July, so even more now. And they have found that it definitely makes a difference. But if the people in the unvaccinated pregnancy, we are seeing a tick up in ICU admissions, in intubation, and in death. Now, granted, that is a very, very slow, so I'm not here to scare folks. But there is a real benefit in pregnancy and getting vaccinated, and it is safe.
Thank you, Dr. Walker. That's it's a very scary thing, so I appreciate the detailed response. I went on a deep dive when I was looking for rumors, and so I've got a bunch more, but we're going to open it up now for questions because we're starting to run out of time. So if you have a question, please come to one of the 2 mics up here, and we'll have our panelists answer it for you. Hi.
Hi. So quickly, I would just like to say that I've never been vaccinated. The only thing I've ever had is a tetanus shot. But I was just curious, how does me not getting or getting the vaccination affect my parents? If I'm vaccinated and I can still get COVID, wouldn't my parents still be at risk?
And what's your name?
My name's Zoe.
Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic question. So your question is, how can you getting the vaccination impact your parents? And I'm going to kind of connect the dots. We said that even vaccinated people we're seeing can get infected, and so it becomes confusing, right? If I get vaccinated so I can prevent disease, but if I can still pass it, why would I get vaccinated? Did I capture that correctly?
Yes, thank you.
So what we're seeing is there is a decreased risk of getting COVID if you're vaccinated. We have to acknowledge it's not perfect. And so getting vaccinated does decrease the risk of you passing it on to your parents. If your parents are also vaccinated, then getting it decreases their risk as well. And so both together provide an increased level of safety.
Thank you for that question. Okay, no, I think we need to, yeah, I'm sorry. We're so limited on time. I apologize. Yes, what's your name and what's your question?
Wait, do you ask for my name?
Yeah.
My name's Joey. I'm actually vaccinated. This is a little bit different question. I got my vaccination like 3 months ago, let's say, will there ever be some point in the future where I might need to go get another one?
Great question.
Because, you know, Delta or whatever, you know, as it like ravages its way through people, it's evolving or whatever.
That's a great question. Thank you.
So
The booster, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about the booster there.
Yeah, so I'll take that one. It depends a little bit on which vaccine you got, but likely there will.
I got the one shot.
So you got the
specifically?
Johnson & Johnson.
Yes.
So that vaccine, as of today, unless somebody has new information, we don't have information as to when you should get a booster. But very likely, people who got the Johnson & Johnson will get a booster, whether it is a same vaccine or switching over to an mRNA vaccine. However, for the Pfizer vaccine, we do have the recommendation is that people get a booster, and this is all just sort of evolving in the last few days and weeks. People who got a Pfizer, the 2 shots, should get a booster at the 8-month mark, so 8 months after your second vaccine. It will likely be the same for the Mrna. And because we're learning as we go about how long the immunity lasts, and with these variants, it's hard to know projecting into the future whether this will be a yearly thing or how frequently, but that is where we are right now with the science. Does anybody else?
Okay, great.
No,
Thank you.
that's very
Thanks,
good.
Joe.
You're welcome.
Hi, what's your name? What's your question?
My name is Jack, and I have a question that my dad has. So he's not vaccinated, and he's just scared that he treats it like it's a flu, right? I mean, I'm sure you heard that argument before where they're like, why should I get vaccinated? It's just a flu, right? I mean, I had it before. I know it's definitely not the flu. It knocked me on my back for a week, but I just wanted to get a short memo that I can send to him of why he should get it and why it's not the flu.
Yeah.
So I think it depends in your particular instance how to help convince your dad that maybe it's in his best interest will depend on what resonates with him. So it's not everything's going to work for everybody.
Yeah.
But in general, for some people, it's not even as bad as the flu. So he's hoping for that. But for many people, it is like the flu or worse. And then depending on your age, so if you're 85 and older, about 19% of those people end up in the hospital. If you're between 45 and 65, which may be closer to, between above 65, I think, your chance of getting in the hospital is about 4%. So it is, and then many people are dying from this. So he's taking his chances, but it really may be a balance of what are the downside of getting vaccinated. So maybe he can kind of understand better that the risk of the vaccination is quite low. But I'm happy to talk to you afterwards. We have a lot of handouts and patient materials that we'd be happy to share with you that might put that in number terms that he can better understand.
Okay.
Mr.
Thank
Heaton,
you
do you deal with that quite a bit as well, trying to convince people? Dave?
Yeah, so I'm the only one that's not a doctor here, but maybe I get my street credential just from since the beginning of the pandemic till now. As a health department, on social media, email, phone call, couple threats to our front lawns, we have been hammered from every possible side of the vaccine issue, of the COVID issue, of the masking issue. And so, yeah, that has definitely been a challenge. Our main goal is to get out accurate information, and to repeat a couple things that have been said here. You are absolutely right to question the vaccines, to find information. I think young age people especially are in a wonderful position before you get too hardened into a point of view that almost becomes religious. So people that were strongly anti-vax before this did not change their mind. In fact, it only became more hardened. On the other side, there are some aspects of public health and prevention that are too extreme. Some people that say you cannot wear enough masks or they can't have enough mandates. Somewhere in the middle, there's nuance, there's finding information that are more than just sound bites and more than links on Facebook. And if I can just take a second here, one of the most important things I can tell you is we're going to have to finish up here in a bit. One of the best sources of information that we have found, we're a local government public health department, is actually an individual we've started linking to, and we get a lot of flack from all sides on this, but his name is Dr. Zubin Damania. He is a hospitalist, former MD, well-educated, highly researched, has a lot of people he has on as guests of his show. If you go to zdogg.com, zdogg.com, I know most of all you here have smartphones, look him up now, go to his website. Specifically look at his video called 3 COVID Vaccine Myths. That's a good starting point where he addresses the protein spikes, the vaccine injury, misinformation. Most all of the videos he does are very accessible, where they take this kind of information and he's totally non-political. He gets the politics out of it. He gets the research into it. His motto is let science the crap out of this. We can't link to all his videos as a health department because his language gets a little bit spicy, but he is one of the individuals of the health department. Since from day one, we have seen grab onto this issue, get rid of the politics and the extremes, and give very accessible information that we've actually started posting to that. I think the fact that we've been getting flack from all sides shows that maybe that might be a good idea.
Thanks, Dave. And thanks, Jack. I think we're here. Could you state your name? Yeah.
My name is Ben, and I just wanted to know approximately how effective are the mRNA vaccines against contraction of the Delta variant compared to other variants?
So the data, studies on that have a wide range. There are studies that show it's as low as 50%, 50 to 60% effective at preventing disease. Now, it's important to specify disease prevention versus hospitalization and death. All three are important, but if we could only prevent one of them, we'd probably all agree we want to prevent death, and then hospitalization, and then disease. The initial studies showed about a 95% protection, and that was before the Delta variant. So the more people there are in the world that are positive, the more people that are that have COVID, the higher the chance of additional variants. The more we decrease the number of infected people in the world, the more we can decrease the chance of additional variants. And so it's a really good question as far as the effectiveness on Delta variant. We also need to be thinking about what about the next variant and trying to decrease the chance of those variants.
Dr. Arch?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say, and we didn't address this, but variants develop when someone gets infected. If you can stop people from getting infected, you won't get variants. Variants are basically when a virus gets into your cells, it makes many copies of itself. And in that process, mistakes can happen in making the DNA for those viruses. If that happens, and one of those mistakes is advantageous to the virus, it makes it more infectious, it makes it more capable, then that virus will become dominant, that variant will become dominant. And so if we can stop people from getting infected, we can stop these more aggressive variants, which is the problem. And it's another reason to get vaccines. It's sort of like survival of the fittest for viruses.
And I think it's worth just saying that the Delta variant is known to be at least twice as contagious, which is why we're seeing this spike we're having now.
I think it's also worth mentioning that I've seen speculation or a myth that the vaccine causes variants. That is not true. The vaccine does not cause variants. If there's a variant that is mutated such that the vaccine isn't effective against it, as Dr. Arch said, that becomes the predominant vaccine, or excuse me, the predominant variant. But the vaccine does not cause variants. So that's important to understand.
Great. Okay. Thanks, Ben. I think we're running real short on time. We have the video that we're going to be showing. The last three questions? Okay. If we can go a little bit over, that would be fantastic. So we'll do this. So I think they were ahead, and then we'll finish up with you, okay?
Perfect.
All right. Sounds good. Hi.
Hi. My name is Lisa Welch. I'm actually representing the whole dental hygiene department from Dixie State because they had meetings and they asked me to come over.
Okay.
So I do have 3 questions, but that I've been asked to ask by students and members of my department. I'll be really quick. The first was regarding people that have autoimmune disorders that are predisposed to allergies, and also premenopausal women, that they are more predisposed to autoimmune diseases. So is the vaccine safe for people with those kind of triggers? MS, RA, premenopause, menopause, those kind of things. That was the first.
Great question.
The second was the hospital's contingency plan. When do we become disaster? So we have a contingency. And the other one that I've now lost, so I'll let you ask those, but it was a
Let's start with the autoimmune deficiencies, and then let's go to the disaster plan.
So I think it's important to remember with autoimmune disease, So a lot of times we don't know what causes all autoimmune diseases, but a lot of times the theory is that it's triggered by viral infection. So in fact, getting COVID-19 or another virus is more likely to cause more problems with autoimmune disease than the vaccine itself. It's important to remember the vaccine, it's a very elegant design, and it's just that little mRNA particle that just exposes your body to the spike protein, and then your immune system reacts to that. Whereas if you get COVID-19, you're getting the whole shebang from COVID-19. There's many different particles that your body can mount an immune response against. So the vaccine, from that perspective, is far safer. As far as people who have rheumatoid arthritis and are, say, on medications, prednisone, immunosuppressant medications, those patients should very much be vaccinated, just like transplant patients, but they also need a third dose. So not the 8-month dose, but a third dose 1 month after their second dose if they get an mRNA vaccine, because we found their immune systems don't mount as good of a response. And then as far as the menopausal,
as far as menopause or perimenopause, I can reassure you in relationship to menstrual flow or lack thereof, there is no concern in regards to that. The only thing I would say, obviously, that could be generally an older population. The older we get, the more other health issues we could have, and so those people would obviously be better candidates to think about the vaccination.
One thing I just want to add, for patients like you described with autoimmune disease, it is important, though, we're giving general recommendations, but if they have specific questions, they should talk with their rheumatologist or their own doctor.
With regard to your question about hospital contingency and crisis planning, so when we talk about crisis standards of care, there's 3 levels of crisis standards of care. There's conventional, which is what normally happens day to day at any hospital. There's contingency, which is where we're at right now. We're expanded beyond our normal ICU. We're not in conventional care any longer. We're in contingency care already for ICU. And the third and final step is crisis care, where, at the extreme, what people often think about with crisis care is we have a limited number of resources and we're trying to decide who gets it. We don't want to get to that point. We have not been to that point. What we are doing right now in contingency care, because our ICU is over 100% capacity, we have stopped doing elective surgeries that require an ICU bed. So that's already taking place right now in our community. And that's so that we can manage the ICU beds. When we talk about crisis care, there's 3 levels. There's number 1, staff, supplies, and space. We can make more beds. We have blue tents. We've taken them down. We could put up another blue tent, but if we don't have the supplies or the staff, there's no use for them. We can get supplies at this point. Staff is going to be our hardest thing. We can't simply make nurses overnight. We can't make doctors overnight. And if you pair that with what Dr. Walker talked about, that people are getting burned out from all the additional shifts and the difficulty of taking care of these very sick patients, staff is one of the biggest concerns.
Thank you, Dr. Crow.
Thank you. My other question is specific to healthcare, so I might be able to ask it later regarding the hepatitis B vaccine as well, because we have some students that, they're like, which should I get? Which is more important? Can I get both? But I'll have you answer that personally later, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think they're going to hang around for just a little bit afterwards. So thank you. Great questions. Okay. Come on up. What's your name and what's your question?
Hi, my name is Evgaela. My question is, I have family that works over at the hospital, specifically my mother, and weekly she holds rounds and meetings and stuff, and they do exercises, and one of the exercises showed that the majority of the people in attendance at the meeting were most concerned about getting burnout and experiencing further PTSD, depending on how long this goes on or even after it's finished currently. So I was wondering what could be the long-term effects of that, and how can we maybe see where this is going?
Yeah, so we're back to stress on the healthcare professionals.
Yeah, so that's a really, really insightful question, because you've gone beyond what we're dealing with now and starting to think about the impact on our caregivers after the fact, which is really an excellent question. Thank you. There's a couple things we're doing. This summer's when a lot of people take vacation, and we were starting to ramp up again. And the question got asked, boy, can we afford to have our nurses, doctors, staff take vacations? Maybe we need to not allow vacations. And very quickly, I'm happy to say, very quickly we came to the conclusion that that would be terrible, that we can't prevent people from taking vacation. That's really critical. People need to take care of themselves. And so what we've tried to focus on at the hospital is the leadership principle of servant leadership. That, you know, as the medical director of the hospital, if I see that the doctors on the medical staff are struggling, they're not going to be able to do a good job taking care of patients. So I have to focus my attention on ensuring that they're well taken care of, in the short term and in the long term. We have employee assistance programs with social workers, mental health professionals that we bring in on purpose to meet with people. We're looking at how do we give people breaks, how do we make sure that people are supported. So it's an ongoing strategy, and I think we'll continue to learn more and we'll continue to do more, but it's something we can't lose sight of. Great question.
And I think we all support our healthcare professionals, and we love what you're doing. We're sorry that you're having to go through this. Okay, so I think great question. I think we're not, last but not least, sir, you've been waiting for a long time.
Thank you so much for coming out and having this. I think this is very important. My question is there any local resources or reports that cover the VAERS death and injury numbers on the Pfizer vaccine? And just, I've looked for it, and I want to be very wary at where I get my information. And so how can I make an informed information if I don't have that information? And then additionally, why are we not seeing a discussion on natural immunities after overcoming the COVID infection versus the breakthrough numbers of the vaccinated?
So I think your question was twofold. One, how do you get accurate data on side effects of the vaccine?
Yeah, so the VAERS death and accident.
Yeah.
Is there any local ones, especially here?
Yeah, so I'll touch on the VAERS database briefly, and then the second question.
Natural immunities.
Oh, natural immunity. Yeah, so really good questions. With regard to the natural immunity, we have really good data on, as a state, on those that have been vaccinated and when they come into the hospital. It's part of that data gets entered into a USIS database, and that's been the case for decades. So that's not a new database. So when a patient comes to the hospital, we're able to look and say, have they been vaccinated or not vaccinated? So when I share the data about what % of breakthrough cases are not, I have a lot of confidence because we have that database. We don't have something similar for people that have been previously infected. So if a patient is admitted to the hospital, Intermountain Healthcare, and they had previously tested positive at an Intermountain Healthcare site, we would have that in our database. If they tested positive at a non-Intermountain Healthcare site, we wouldn't have that information in our database. So it becomes very difficult to say, here's the % of patients that have been previously infected and have developed natural immunity and now break through from natural immunity versus not. What we know that the risk of being in the hospital after natural immunity, or the risk of reinfection after natural immunity, is lower, for sure. If I have 3 people, or 2 people, one that's been infected and one that has not been infected, and I've only got one vaccine, I would give it to the person that's not been infected because there's no natural immunity at all there. So, so there's a bit of challenge just based on availability of data on that. With regard to the VAERS database, anybody that's gone and looked at that has seen the challenges that we have with that it's a self-reporting database, and unfortunately, we've seen, especially with the COVID vaccine, people going in and putting in symptoms, putting in complications that frankly don't even make any sense. And so the accuracy of that data and the reliability of that data has really taken a significant hit with the COVID vaccine in particular, the vaccines in general. So, Dr. O'Bray?
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, one of the main purposes of the VAERS database is, so if people aren't familiar with that, you can go in and say a month out you have, so I'll give you some of my patients. So, you know, there's a baseline of disease that people always have in a community. So I have patients who develop atrial fibrillation, who have strokes, who have heart attacks, and some are going to develop those 3 weeks after the vaccine, some are going to develop them 6 months. So you have to look long term and see, are we seeing an increased signal? Are we seeing more strokes than we would in the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated over a long period of time? So the database helps kind of hone in on where you may have a problem, like with these very rare blood clots or things like that. But it's not a randomized controlled study, and so and that data is being looked at all the time. But then there's the problems: are the data always accurate? One other thing to your other question, I brought this handout, and we can make copies. But this is really goes through why vaccines are more effective than natural infection, and there's some good data here. There's also a study done out of Kentucky showing that as well, that you're about 2.5 times more likely to get COVID again that if you've had a natural infection versus the vaccine. But like Dr. Carroll said, I mean, if you had a limitation of vaccine, you'd give it to the person who had not had an infection.
Awesome.
There's no limitation to vaccine. There's enough
Right,
for
there's
everybody,
not. Yeah.
whether you've been infected or
Yeah,
not.
we have got plenty.
Thank you. Great questions. Okay, I think we're now, Del?
Thank you so much. Would you all join me in a round of applause for our panelists and for Vince Brown as our moderator? Also, and if the panelists have just a few minutes, I know that some of the audience members would love to just visit with you individually. I want to thank every one of them for being here, and thank you. I know this was put together on a rush basis. We were broadcasting it live on social media as well, and we will share that link and that recording with all of you. So thank you so much. We wanted to provide you as much information as possible, and just go out and help spread the word to all of your fellow students, and go Trailblazers. And really quickly, we have one, it's a very short video. You're going to love it.
As an ICU nurse, over the last year, we've seen a lot of COVID. At first, we really felt helpless, and it was a tragedy. Then the vaccine came out. Our unit cleared out. We went all the way down to 0. We were feeling rejuvenated, and everyone was starting to get back into helping people, seeing people improve and get out of the unit. The new variants came out, and we saw COVID start to come back.
Like in December, we all took this really seriously. That was the highest numbers we saw was December, and everyone was trying to be strict and try to stay safe because we were all worried in December, and our numbers are at December. We're going through what we were going through in December with less staff now. And I don't think the public understands that it's getting worse, it's not getting better.
99% of our patients are unvaccinated, and they don't need to be here. And it breaks all of the nurses' hearts just seeing that this didn't have to happen. We want to help people realize that they can do this for themselves and their family members and prevent the suffering that we as nurses and physicians and techs see every day in the ICU. Just like when you wear a seatbelt in your car, there's not the chance that you won't die. You're still taking the chance with driving. With the vaccine, there's still a chance that you could get COVID, but you're preventing severe disease.
We're not seeing vaccine injuries. It's false information being spread, and it's dangerous information because the vaccine is safe and effective, and it's working because our ICU patients aren't unvaccinated. They're not vaccine patients.
I had a patient just the other day. As soon as that young mom got intubated, the husband went out that night and got the vaccine right away. Before, he was hesitant, and as soon as he saw the damage and the suffering, he went and got that vaccine. And he just came in a couple of weeks ago and expressed how grateful that he was that he has the opportunity to stay here for his children, where the mom passed away from COVID. Almost all of them have said, why didn't I get vaccinated? One day of being sick, maybe 2 days. It's not worth dying for.
So thank you so much again for joining us. And again, our panelists are willing to stay and chat with you for a minute. We do have plenty of food, so if you'd like to take some with you, that would be great.
COVID is coming back a lot stronger, and the patients are coming in.
So if someone's going, Ellen, are you going back to the hall?